Okay, I want you to think about your last performance review or your last self assessment. If you're at a company where you write those, which honestly it's own form of invisible work, what did you put on there? Features skipped, OKRs hit, maybe roadmap accuracy, maybe some customer satisfaction scores or NPS movement. All good stuff, all real, but here's what I guarantee you didn't write down. You didn't write, had 20 pre-meetings over 3 weeks to get stakeholders aligned before the platform migration decision, which is why the actual meeting took 45 minutes and nobody tried to kill each other. You didn't write, spent a Tuesday coffee chat learning that my engineering lead is frustrated because nobody ever explains the why behind the priority changes. And because I learned that, I changed how I communicate roadmap shifts, which is why we didn't lose 2 engineers to attrition this quarter. And you definitely didn't write, caught the CEO in the hallway after the all hands and the way he said, yeah, the direction looks good, while looking at his phone, which told me he's actually nervous about where we're headed. So I proactively put together a one-pager addressing his unspoken concerns before the board meeting. None of that shows up on your scorecard. You can't put read a room correctly into a Jira ticket. There's no OKR for build enough political capital to survive Q3. But I would argue, and I hope Jeff is going to back me up on this, that this is often the highest leverage work you do as a PM. Not sometimes, often. And yet we treat it like overhead, like it's a tax you pay before you get to the real work. I've been guilty of this myself, especially earlier in my career when I thought the job was the roadmap and everything else was a distraction. Today we're going to talk about the invisible work, what it actually is, why it matters more than PMs think. And this is the part I wish someone have told me 10 years ago. Why skipping it is the single most reliable way for a good PM to fail. Jeff is going to break down the invisible work what actually looks like with a framework, and then I'll share some stories, some where I got it right, and honestly a few where I got it very wrong, because I think that's where the real learning is. Jeff, take it away.
Thanks, Anna. So let's start with a working definition. Invisible work is everything you do as a PM that creates leverage but doesn't show up in any tracking system. It's not on your roadmap, it's not in Jira, it's not something you can point to in a quarterly review and say, here's the deliverable, but without it, nothing works. So let me break down what I mean by giving you a framework. Invisible work, as I see it, falls into 5 categories. The first one is relationship building. This is the trust debt that you build so you can spend it later. The one-on-ones where you're not asking for anything, just learning how things work, how someone thinks. The lunch where you find out what motivates your engineering lead. The Slack DM where you're celebrating some other team's win. None of that necessarily feels productive in the moment, but when you need to push a hard decision through, or when you need someone to go to bat for you in a room you're not in, this is what you're drawing on. The second one is what I call context gathering, and this is where you're building your mental model of how the organization actually works. Who has influence versus who just has a title, and that happens all the time. Which battles are worth fighting, which battles are you don't even need to fight. Where the political landmines are buried, and there are almost always political landmines out there. You're not producing anything, you're just listening, you're observing, you're connecting the dots. But this context is what lets you navigate complex decisions without stepping on every landmine. The third one, and this is where I think a lot of PMs spend a lot of their time, is what I'll call translation work. You're the interpreter between the engineering team and the business, between the technical constraints and the customer's needs, between what gets built and what gets sold, between what the CEO wants and what's actually possible. And this work is completely invisible. When it goes well, people don't even notice that you did it. They just think the meeting went smoothly. But when it goes poorly, you get blamed for all the miscommunication. The fourth one, and this is the one that gets, I think, skipped the most because it's an easy thing to think you don't need to do, but it's maybe the most important one of these 5. Pre-alignment. Before any big decision, there's all this work that you do to make sure that the actual meeting doesn't explode. You're laying the groundwork for future success. Having side conversations. You're having I think I'm going to propose X, what concerns do you have conversations. You're finding out who's going to oppose you before you take it to the public meeting, so you can address their issues before they arise in public. The great PMs know that decisions aren't necessarily made in the meetings. They're made in all the conversations before the meetings. And if you're doing this right, the meeting is just where you announce what's already been decided. The 5th one is reading the room. This is real-time context processing. It's body language. It's energy shifts. Who defers to who? The side eye that happens when somebody's name gets mentioned. The glance between 2 stakeholders that tells you that they had a conversation that's happened before and is beneath the current conversation. This is pure analog context. There are terabytes of sensory data generated in every meeting, and you're filtering it constantly, looking for signals. You can't capture this stuff in meeting notes. You just have to be there and pay attention. So now this is what ties all 5 of these categories together. None of this can be automated. None of it can be delegated to a junior PM, and none of it really ever shows up on any performance metrics, which brings us to the question, if it's invisible, how do we know it matters? Anna, you've seen what happens when PMs skip this work. What does that look like?
Oh, I've seen it. I've been it. Let me tell you a few stories. So once I worked with a PM, let's call her Mandy, who have been objectively brilliant, fast, organized. Her PRDs were immaculate. Her sprint velocity was the best on the team. If you looked at her dashboard, she was a machine, and she knew it. But Mandy had a philosophy. I don't do politics. She actually said that out loud in the meeting once. She meant it as a badge of honor, like, I'm above that, just let the work speak for itself. So when Mandy needed to push through a platform change that would require the infrastructure team to reprioritize their entire quarter, she walked into the meeting with a beautiful slide deck and all right data. Cost savings projections, customer impact analysis, a risk assessment, flawless. And she got destroyed. The infrastructure had concerns she had never heard because she never asked him. The VP of the engineering felt blindsided because nobody had given him a heads up. And the CTO, who actually agreed with Mandy's proposal, couldn't support her publicly because she'd skipped him in the stakeholder chain and he felt disrespected. So Mandy came out of that meeting genuinely confused. She kept saying, but data supports this, the data is right. And she was right. The data was right, but data doesn't make decisions. People make decisions, and people need to feel heard, respected, considered, and included in the process, not just presented to. And you shouldn't assume, very big thing here, that they will decide on the data as you did. So the proposal eventually went through, by the way, 3 months later. After someone else did all the relationship and alignment work, Mandy had skipped 3 months of delay because the invisible work didn't get done. So there's a caution tale, and I think you can see what is kind of the lesson there. There's another story. So this one still makes me cringe because I was in the room. A roadmap prioritization meeting. Big one, 2 VPs, the CPO, about 8 PMs, and 2 of the VPs had fundamentally different views on what the top priority should be. So one wanted to double down on enterprise, and the other was convinced we were about to lose the mid-market. Now, any experienced PM in that room could have seen this collision coming from a mile away. Both VPs had been signaling their positions for weeks in Slack comments, in the way they asked questions, in stand-ups, in the metrics they chose to highlight. But the PM who owned the roadmap review didn't do any pre-alignment, so didn't have the side conversations, didn't surface the conflicts early, just walked in and presented the roadmap like it was a done deal. What happened? The two VPs started arguing, not screaming. They were professionals, but it was tense, pointed. The kind of argument where everyone else in the room staring at their laptops, pretending to take notes. The meeting ended with no decisions, a lot of bruised egos, and a PM who looked like they couldn't manage their stakeholders. So here's the thing. 3 conversations could have prevented that. One with each VP to understand their position, and one with the CPO to flag the disagreement and agree on a framework for resolving it. Maybe 2 hours of work total. Instead, it became organizational drama that took weeks to clean up. So that is a pattern I see over and over and over, and I see this so clearly now. But I couldn't see it all when I was early in my career. So junior PMs don't know invisible work exists, and no one actually warns you about it. You have to learn it by yourself, or someone as a good Samaritan would tell you this in front as a mentor. So they watch a senior PM get a controversial decision approved in a single meeting and think, wow, they're so lucky. Stakeholders just like them. No, that senior PM spent 2 weeks having coffee, spending thoughtful Slack messages, getting early feedback, adjusting their proposal based on concerns that were raised privately. The meeting was the performance. The rehearsals happened where nobody could see them. It's not just because you don't see it that it's not happening behind the curtain, right? So mid-level PMs, and this is where I was stuck for longer than I'd like to admit, mid-level PMs know the invisible work exists, but they deprioritize it. I don't have time for coffee chats. I have roadmap to ship. I literally said that to my manager, who, to her credit, looked at me and said, Anna, the roadmap doesn't ship itself. So people ship it. And right now, those people don't trust you enough to follow you through the hard parts. And that was a hard lesson, but very important one. And I hope people listening it will trust me on this and don't have to go it through themselves, but actually put it in an action point to have, next time when they reach to this level, just implement the invisible work. So this was the wake-up call for me. Senior PMs protected time for invisible work fiercely. Not because they have more time, they usually have less, but because they have been burned enough times to know it's not optional. And one more story, and this is one's about reading the room. I was in sprint review where an engineer was presenting a feature they'd built. Good feature, solid work, but as they were presenting, I noticed the design lead was doing the thing where she'd nod along, but her jaw was tight. And every time the engineer showed a specific interaction pattern, she'd glance at her notebook and write something. Not now on paper, everything was fine. Nobody raised objections. The feature was approved, but after the meeting, I walked over to the design lead and said, hey, I noticed you seemed like you might have some thoughts about on the interaction pattern in the last demo. Am I reading that right? And she unloaded. She had major concerns about accessibility. She'd raised them weeks ago in a design review, thought that they'd been addressed, and was now seeing that they hadn't been, actually. She was frustrated, but didn't want to call out the engineer publicly, obviously. So because I saw that on time, we were able to address the accessibility issues before the feature went to QA. And if I'd missed it, or if I hadn't paying attention because I was answering Slack messages on my laptop, The feature would have been shipped with accessibility problems. We would have gotten customer complaints, and the design lead would have lost trust in the process, all because of a tight jaw and a glance at the notebook. So that's invisible work. It doesn't have a ticket, it doesn't have a deliverable, but it changed the outcome. So Jeff, you got a framework for why this isn't just soft skills. I think people need to hear that because I know there's PMs listening right now who feel guilty every time they have a conversation that doesn't produce an artifact.
Yeah, those are some great examples, Anna. I love that story about trust. Here's what I want to make crystal clear. Invisible work isn't just soft skills. It's the highest leverage work that you can do. And I've been thinking a lot about it. I'm finishing up my next book called Culture of Speed, Closing the Human Gap in the AI Age, and it should be out this summer. In the book, I talk about the distinction between digital context and analog context, and this matters directly, or maps directly, to why invisible work matters so much. Digital context is information that can be captured and processed: meeting notes, action items, project timelines, customer feedback scores, roadmap status. This is the stuff that shows up in your tracking systems. Analog context is knowledge that has to be experienced. The smirk when someone's name gets mentioned, the political dynamics that just don't show up on an org chart, and the unspoken body language that tells you a decision is about to go sideways. Who really has influence versus who just has the title. And here's the thing, after a 1-hour stakeholder meeting, the AI gets 3 bullet points, decisions made, action items, next steps, maybe you share a transcript, all the stuff that's easily datafied. But what's really going on in the room? You've got billions of neurons processing hundreds of micro interactions, hesitations, energy shifts, knowing glances, deference patterns, subtext beneath the stated positions in the meeting. There are terabytes of data getting generated by the players in the room, and the AI gets a thin slice. And this is what your invisible work builds, your analog context. Analog context is what separates good PMs from great ones. A junior PM walks into a room, prioritization conversation, and they've got their data. A senior PM walks in knowing that the VP of sales was burned last time, and you deprioritize their requests, and that the CTO is worried about tech debt and won't say it publicly. And when the CEO uses the phrase "just a thought," what they really mean is "make this happen." None of that's written down anymore. You learned it from your invisible work. And here's why it matters even more in the age of AI. AI is getting really good at digital context. It can analyze customer feedback, it can synthesize research, and it can draft your PRDs. But AI will never have all the analog context. It won't pick up the tension in the room. It won't know that your engineering lead says, "Yeah, we can do that," in a flat voice, and what they really mean is, "This is going to be painful and you're going to owe me." Which means that the invisible work, all that relationship building, the context gathering, the reading the room, this is becoming more valuable, not less. And it's what differentiates the work that we do versus the work that AI can do. So when someone tells you that you're spending too much time in one-on-one coffee chats, or when you're feeling guilty about not having deliverables from a week of meetings, just remember, you're not avoiding real work. You're doing the work that actually demonstrates and determines whether anything else succeeds. Anna, what are some of the red flags that tell you that someone isn't doing enough of the invisible work?
So there are a few patterns I've learned to watch for in other PMs, and honestly in myself, because I've hit every single one of those at some point. The first one is what I call the surprised by resistance pattern. PM presents something they think is totally straightforward, like I mentioned with Mandy, And maybe it's a prioritization call, maybe it's a scope change, maybe it's a new process, and suddenly there's pushbacks, real pushback, and the PM's standing there going, I don't understand why they're being so difficult about this. So every time I hear a PM say, I don't understand the resistance, I know they skipped the pre-work. So because you'd had the side conversations, you'd ask people what their concerns were before you got into the room, you would understand the resistance perfectly, or you maybe wouldn't have even had the resistance, right? So you might not agree with it, maybe, but you would be surprised by it. So surprise is the most expensive emotion in product management. When you're surprised, you're reactive usually, and you're defensive. So you're making decisions on the fly that you should have had time to think through. And the second pattern that I would definitely mention is the I have the data defense. So this one is close to my heart because it was my default mode for years. A PM does rigorous analysis, has the numbers, has the customer research, has the competitive landscape, and generally cannot understand why stakeholders aren't just falling in line. Here's what took me way too long to learn. So data doesn't make decisions. Data informs the decisions, as we already mentioned, but this decisions are made by people, and people operate on trust, relationships, and context just as much as they operate on evidence. If someone doesn't trust your judgment, they will find a reason to question your data. If someone feels excluded from the process, they will resist the conclusion, even if they agree with it intellectually. So the data isn't necessarily sufficient, basically. So I had a mentor who said something that stuck with me. Being right is table stakes. The real skills is being right in the way that people can actually act on. So, and the gap between being right and being actionable, that's invisible work, right? What I would definitely mention also as a red flag or like a pattern is the efficiency trap. So this is the one that I would say that I see the most often in high-performing PMs, which is ironic. I don't have time for coffee chats. I have real work to do, as you mentioned. So I can't do this one-on-one this week. I have a launch to manage. So they're neglecting the relationships, but more focused on something that's more tangible as reports or anything else. And they forget that every conversation is transactional, and they wonder why nobody volunteers to help with things when things go sideways, why nobody gives them the benefit of the doubt, why their Slack messages get answered last, and so on. So this is something to watch out if you find yourself as a very high-performing PM. And the fourth one would be the meeting velocity problem. So going from meeting to meeting to meeting without ever stopping to process or to make some notes, or basically do some quick wins as action points, sending emails and getting stuff done, is something that would take you to not being, you think you're being productive because you were in all the meetings, but you weren't really in any of them. So you didn't have time to notice that the engineering manager seemed checked out, or that two people talked past each other on a key assumptions, or that the thing everyone agreed to is actually in conflict with what was decided yesterday. The meetings become a blur. So you're just doing them to do them. You lose the signal in the noise, and you end up making decisions based on an incomplete, outdating mental model, which is arguably worse than making decisions with no information at all, because at least then you know you're guessing. So Let me tell you what it looks like when it's working. I worked with a PM named, let's call him Mark. Mark was not flashy. He wasn't the loudest person in the room. His slide decks were fine, not amazing, but Mark had a superpower. He made hard things look easy. Decisions that would take other PMs 3 continuous meetings to resolve, Mark would get them done in one. And it wasn't because he was luckier or smarter. It's because by the time the meeting appeared, he'd already talked to everyone who mattered. He knew their concerns. He did the due diligence. He adjusted his proposals to address the real objections, not the stated ones, the real ones. So he'd given the key decisions makers a preview so they didn't feel ambushed. The meeting was formality. The decision had already been shaped through 20 conversations nobody else saw. So that would definitely be something to watch out for and to implement as fast as you can if you're not already doing this. One thing that I can also mention about him, that everyone liked working with him. And I'm not sure if people are aware how important that is, that people like to work with you. Engineers would love to build their features. Design wanted to collaborate with him. Executive trusted his judgment, not because he was a pushover, but he pushed back plenty, but because he'd invested so much in the relationships that people give him the benefit of the doubt. So same decisions, same organizational complexity, completely different outcomes. The only variable was the invisible work, and the person who had the superpower or knew that he has to do this in order to succeed. It's basically sales, as I would say, but however you would love to call it, it's really useful. So, Jeff, the obvious follow-up question: if this matters so much, how do you actually protect time for it? So, because I know everyone listening is thinking, great, one more thing I need to do on top of everything else.
Yeah, and I love that thing about when people like you, they give you their discretionary energy. They'll we can only give up to 100%, but most people work comfortably in this 80 to 90% range, and they only dip into the 90 to 100% range. A lot of times because they like the person, they feel like they're on the same team with the person, and that's all the things that this relationship building actually does. I also liked what you said about the efficiency trap. If the first time you talk to somebody is when you need something from them, you're losing, and you don't want to be in that situation. Build the relationships before you need them. So protecting time. If invisible work is so important, why do we keep squeezing it out? And the answer usually is it's not urgent. You're not going to get a Slack ping that says, hey, build trust with the engineering lead. It's due today. Nobody's going to gather political context in your roadmap plan. So invisible work gets crowded out by things that are urgent, that feature that needs to ship, the bug that's impacting customers, or the executive that wants an answer by the end of the day. And this is classic urgent versus important stuff. And the only way to solve it is to make invisible work non-negotiable. And here are some ways to do that. First thing is block your time for relationship building. The people who have been on my team know that I hold one-on-ones sacred. I hate killing or canceling meetings. I will rearrange the world to make one-on-ones happen, and it's if I have to cancel one over the course of the year, that's about my limit for a weekly one-on-one. So protect your one-on-ones, protect your coffee chats, put informal check-ins on your calendar like they're product reviews, because they're just as important. If you don't have time to build relationships with your engineering lead, your design partner, your key stakeholders, you really don't have time to be a PM. You just have time to be a glorified project manager. Second one, build rituals around your context gathering. This doesn't mean you spend hours wandering around the office with a coffee mug in your hand. It can be as simple as starting every week with 15 minutes to review who do I need to talk to this week and what do I need to find out. End every meeting asking yourself, what did I just learn about how this organization works? And keep a running document of your context. Your context notes, who has influence, what motivates people, where the landmines are. And the key here is to spend a little time doing it, making it into a system, a part of your workflow, and not just some random thing that you do from time to time. Third one, and of all the things that I've always tried to pass through to the people on my teams, front load the pre-alignment work. Before any big decisions, get time with people. Schedule side conversations first. Block time to talk to the people who are going to have concerns. Know who's the most likely person to raise an objection and get those objections surfaced early when they're easier to address. One-on-one conversations are better than doing these in groups because you minimize the blast radius for any conflict. If I know that a certain VP is going to have an issue, I don't want that issue to surface in the room with 20 people in it. I want that to surface one-on-one with me, and we sort it out, we figure it out, and I maybe am able to make adjustments to my presentation so that when I get in the room with everybody else, that person who is going to be raising the conflict actually becomes an ally of mine in the meeting because they heard me, they feel invested. We sorted through to a solution together, and by doing that, we ended up in a place where they can support me and they feel heard. It takes time up front, absolutely, but it saves so much time on the back end. 1 week of pre-alignment work can prevent 3 months of trying to recover from a decision that went sideways in a big meeting with everybody in the room. Fourth one, protect your observation time. Don't go from meeting to meeting to meeting without processing. Try and build in buffer time to think, even if it's just a couple minutes. Connect your dots, make your mental notes. The best PMs I know block time after important meetings to capture context. Not just the action items, but again, creating those notes and the meta level stuff. What did I learn about how people are thinking? Did something change? What surprised me? And it might feel indulgent to do this, but it's not. It's really building that analog database so that you have a knowledge base to work from. And then here's the last piece, and this is an important one too. Explain to people what you're doing. One of the reasons why invisible work stays invisible is because PMs don't talk about it. So when you're in a one-on-one with your manager and they ask what you accomplished this week, don't just list a bunch of features shipped and high-level deliverables. Say you spent 3 hours in pre-alignment conversations before the roadmap review. And that's why we got to a decision in 45 minutes instead of three meetings. Or say, I invested time building context with the sales team. And that's how I found out about this customer churn risk before it actually hit our metrics, and we were able to take an action to prevent it. By making the invisible work visible to the people who need to understand the value, you make it more visible. Here's the thing, executives are really good at this, and they already know that this matters. They're doing a lot of the same work at their level if they are worth their salt. When you articulate it, they recognize it because that's what they're doing. They spend a lot of their time managing their peers and managing the information flow up the organization. The ones who don't get it, they're the ones that need to be educated, and you do that by showing the connection between the relationship work that you're doing and the results that it gets. So Anna, bring us home here. what's the final message for PMs listening to this podcast?
Yes, a lot of has been said, and maybe it sounds like a lot, but what I would really want you to take all from this is picture this. You had a week packed with meetings. You didn't ship a single feature, but you built context. You deepened the relationships. You got ahead of thought decisions before it became a crisis. You helped two teams finally get on the same page. That was a fantastic week. Don't let anyone, especially yourself, tell you otherwise. That's the foundational work that makes everything else possible. I'll be honest with you. I spent years beating myself up over weeks like that. Friday would roll around. I'd scan my to-do list and think, what did I even accomplish? Turns out a lot. I built alignment. I built trust. I built foundation. I laid the groundwork for next quarter's wins, year's wins. Who knows? I just couldn't see it because there was no shiny deliverable to it to hold up. So here's my gift to you. A little permission slip from one PM to another. Go have that coffee chat instead of grinding through a feature spec, especially if it's with someone who support you'll need down the road. Spend the hour preparing for a tough conversation instead of plowing through your inbox, because one handled conversation can save you 50 emails later. Block time on your calendar to simply says think. And when someone tries to book over it, protect it fiercely. You've earned the space. Because here's the thing. This is the work. Not the warm-up, not the side quest, the work. Now, let me paint a picture because I think you'll recognize it. Think about that PM you admire, the one who always makes hard things look effortless, conversational decisions, approved without drama, stakeholders always in their corner, reorgs and strategy pivots, they glide through it easily. Here's the secret. They're not magic. They're not unusually lucky. And honestly, they're not necessarily smarter than you. They just did the invisible work. Behind every smooth meeting were 5 candid conversations that happened beforehand. Behind every trusting relationship were dozens of moments where they showed up for people without asking for a thing. Every time they had to read the room perfectly, it was because they'd been paying attention for months, not just in the moment. So I want to leave you with 3 questions. Don't rush to answer them. Just let them sit with you this week. Am I making space for the invisible work, or am I letting the urgent push it aside? When was the last time I connected with a colleague purely to invest in the relationship, not agenda, no ask? And do I truly understand the dynamics of my organization? Very important one. The politics, the emotions, the undercurrents, or am I just winging it and hoping things work out? Because relationship in organizations differ, and it can be a very, very big one. So the last thought, I will leave you with this. The best product managers I've had the privilege to work with, and I worked with many, aren't the ones with the longest list of features launched. They're the ones who understood something deeper. The trust, context, and relationships are the foundation. The roadmap, the features, the big launches, those are what you build on top of that foundation. So without it, even the most brilliant roadmap won't survive its first real test inside the organization. So please protect time for the invisible work. It's the difference between a PM who ships features and a PM who truly moves the business forward. Thank you so much for spending the time with us. The Product Huddle. If this one resonated, even just a little, I'd love for you to share it with a PM who might need to hear it. We all need to hear it at some points. I know I did, and it really helped me. So if you got your own stories about the invisible work, moments where it saved you, or times you skipped it and learned the hard way, would absolutely love to hear them. No matter if you're PM, PO, project manager, or something close, engineering lead, team lead, design lead, find us on LinkedIn, send us a message. Some of our best episodes have come straightforward from your experiences. So until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of the invisible work. It matters more than you know.